Monica Turner, a respected state attorney who, despite her title and status, finds herself wrongfully detained in a moment that challenges her sense of identity and justice. What begins as a frustrating encounter with a single officer quickly unfolds into a much larger battle, a fight to hold an entire system accountable for biases too often left unchecked. Monica's journey takes her from the courthouse to the heart of her community, sparking a movement for change that ripples through the lives of those around her. But can one person truly make a difference against the system? How far will Monica go to ensure that no one else suffers the same injustice? And what price will she pay along the way? If you're ready to find out, keep watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts on this story. We'd love to hear from you. Your perspective matters as much as every voice in this journey for justice. Let's dive in. The afternoon sun bore down on the city of Brighton, illuminating the pavement in a glaring, relentless light. It was the middle of summer, and the heat clung to the air like a heavy blanket, draping itself over the city streets and the people who hurried down them. For Monica Turner, it was just another day in what felt like an endless week. As she maneuvered her black SUV through the downtown traffic, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was racing against time. "Come on," she muttered to herself, glancing at the clock on her dashboard. She was due for an important meeting at her office in less than 10 minutes. And with each red light and every slow-moving car, her frustration grew. Being a state attorney for Brighton was demanding enough on a regular day. Today, she had back-to-back meetings, case briefs to review, and a stack of depositions waiting for her attention. She finally pulled into the parking lot of the Brighton Justice Center, a sleek, modern building in the heart of downtown. The center was practically her second home, a place where she'd invested countless hours, late nights, and early mornings, fighting cases and serving the public. This role had been her dream ever since law school, and she had earned it through years of dedication, hard work, and resilience. But at this moment, as she quickly parked her car and reached for her purse, all she felt was irritation. Her purse was nowhere to be found. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," she said, leaning over the passenger seat and rifling through her belongings. She moved aside a thick file labeled State versus Carson, several loose receipts, and her planner, but her purse was nowhere in sight. No, she muttered, her heartbeat picking up as she dug deeper, moving items around in her car with increasingly frantic motions. Her ID, credit cards, and apartment keys were all in that purse. She was sure she'd brought it with her when she left home that morning. She distinctly remembered grabbing it before heading out. But now, it seemed to have vanished, leaving her scrambling to find it. Her mind began to race. She couldn't be late for this meeting, and there was no time to go back home to search for it. As her hands brushed against yet another empty patch of fabric in the seat crevices, a flicker of doubt crept in. Had she dropped it somewhere? Did it somehow fall out in the parking lot? As she continued her search, she became vaguely aware of the faint hum of an engine nearby. Glancing up, she spotted a police cruiser slowly rolling through the lot, its tires crunching softly against the asphalt. The officer behind the wheel looked her way, and instinctively, she felt a tightening in her stomach. She quickly turned her attention back to her search, hoping he'd pass by without further thought. Her hands were shaking slightly now. Whether from frustration or the quiet discomfort she felt at being watched, she wasn't sure. She tried to refocus on her task, pulling out stray items and digging deeper. But out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the cruiser hadn't moved on. It had stopped, and the officer was getting out. "Hey!" a voice called out, rough and commanding. Monica's fingers froze on the edge of the car seat. She straightened slowly, her mind racing as she tried to keep her composure. She was in no mood for a confrontation, but she'd dealt with officers before, usually as a colleague, not as a person under suspicion. Taking a deep breath, she turned to face him. The officer was a middle-aged man, white, with a rigid posture and a hardened expression that hinted at years on the job. His uniform was neat, his badge gleaming in the sunlight, and his hand rested casually on his belt as he surveyed her with a look that was less professional and more suspicious. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice laced with a tone that made it clear he was not looking for small talk. Monica wiped a bit of sweat from her brow and took a step back from the car, feeling a mixture of irritation and restraint. She held herself with a calmness she didn't entirely feel, determined to keep things civil. "I'm just looking for my purse," she replied evenly, keeping her voice polite. "I seem to have misplaced it somewhere in my car." The officer's scowl deepened. He looked her up and down, his gaze cold and assessing. "You got ID on you?" he asked, his tone sharp and unyielding. Monica blinked, feeling a knot of frustration twist in her stomach. She'd just explained her situation, yet he was treating her words like an excuse rather than an explanation. "Like I said, I lost my purse," she explained, gesturing toward the car with a slight, controlled movement. "That's what I'm looking for. I'm actually running late for a meeting." The officer's expression didn't change, his frown intensifying as if he found her explanation difficult to believe. He muttered, cutting her off. "Late for a meeting. Right. Step away from the vehicle." Monica felt a surge of frustration bubble beneath her calm exterior. She didn't want to argue, didn't want to give him any reason to escalate the situation. Slowly, she took a step back, raising her hands slightly to signal her compliance. "This is my car," she said, a firmer edge to her voice. "I just need to find my purse, and I'll be out of here." But the officer wasn't listening. His gaze remained fixed on her, suspicion mingling with something darker. He took a step closer, his posture rigid, his eyes narrowing. "Lady, you're acting really suspicious," he said, his voice laced with distrust. "You expect me to believe you just lost your purse in this car?" Monica felt her patience stretch thin, but she steadied her voice. "Yes, it's my car. I'm the state attorney." The officer's eyebrows shot up, his mouth curving into a mocking smile. "State attorney, huh?" he repeated, a hint of sarcasm in his tone. "You got any proof of that? Because right now, all I see is someone breaking into a car." Her jaw tightened, a mix of frustration and disbelief flooding through her. She had never expected to be treated like this, especially not here, in her own workplace's parking lot. She forced herself to take a calming breath, refusing to let her emotions show. "I told you," she said, her voice level but firm. "My ID is in my purse. If you let me find it, I can show you everything you need." The officer took another step forward, his hand resting on the top of his holster. "Yeah, sure. Just step away from the vehicle now." Monica opened her mouth to protest, but instinctively, she held back. She knew that arguing could escalate things, that challenging him would likely make the situation worse. Instead, she took another step back, her hands still raised slightly, her mind racing with possible ways to de-escalate. But it was clear the officer had no interest in de-escalation. He took her compliance as an admission of guilt, circling around her car and peering inside, his expression one of eager scrutiny. After a few moments, he turned back to her, a stern look on his face. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Monica's eyes widened, shock and disbelief flooding through her as the situation spun further out of control. "Wait, are you serious?" she managed, her voice tight with disbelief. "I told you, this is my car." But he wasn't listening. He stepped forward, grabbing her arm firmly, snapping the cuffs on her wrists. The cold metal bit into her skin, a stark reminder of her sudden and inexplicable role shift from prosecutor to suspect. "You're under arrest," the officer said, his voice cold and final. "Suspicion of vehicle theft." Sitting in the back of the police cruiser, Monica felt the weight of her situation settle over her like a dense fog. Her wrists ached from the handcuffs, and the hard seat beneath her seemed to press uncomfortably into her back. She'd spent years navigating the criminal justice system, but always from the other side of the courtroom. To be here, in the back of a police car, treated as though she were guilty of a crime, felt surreal. Outside the window, she caught a glimpse of the officer, Officer Mulligan, as she'd overheard him being called, standing by her SUV, peering inside with a flashlight despite the bright afternoon sun. She watched his expression, the way his eyes narrowed as if searching for proof that she didn't belong there. The frustration simmered within her, a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't how her day was supposed to go. She'd come to work prepared to uphold the law, to meet with clients and handle cases that affected real people's lives. Yet here she was, detained by someone who saw her only as a suspicious figure, ignoring everything she'd said about who she was and why she was there. She sighed, glancing around the nearly empty parking lot. A couple of people had walked by earlier, their faces tight with discomfort as they glanced at her in the back of the police car. No one had stopped. No one had intervened. They'd simply walked on, their discomfort outweighing their curiosity. Suddenly, the door opened, and Officer Mulligan reappeared. He pulled her out of the car roughly, his grip firm as he turned her to face him. "Still no ID?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. Monica met his gaze, her patience thinning to a fragile thread. "I told you," she said, her voice steady but clipped. "My purse is somewhere in my car. If you'll let me get it, I can show you everything you need." But Mulligan shook his head, ignoring her completely. "You expect me to believe that you're just some law-abiding citizen who lost her purse in this car?" He gave her a look that suggested he'd already decided who she was, and nothing she said would change that. She took a deep breath, her mind racing through her options. She knew that raising her voice, pleading, or pushing back would only confirm whatever suspicions he had. She was a black woman alone in a parking lot, rummaging through a car she claimed was hers, but had no ID to prove it. She could see the assumptions playing out in his mind, assumptions that had already condemned her without trial or evidence. "Look," she said, doing her best to keep her tone calm, "I'm the state attorney. That's my car. Run the plates, do a background check. You'll see everything's in order." Mulligan let out a mocking laugh, raising an eyebrow. "State attorney, huh? Sure you are. I've heard better stories, but that's up there." Monica stared at him, feeling the last remnants of her patience slip away. She'd spent years fighting through biases and barriers, proving her worth in a world that often saw her as less. Now, standing here, handcuffed and dismissed by a man who wouldn't even check her information, all of that frustration rose to the surface. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, more to herself than to him. Mulligan's eyes flashed, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Ridiculous? You think this is ridiculous?" He waved another officer over, a younger man with a clipboard in hand. "You're just another suspect thinking you're above the law because of some made-up job title. We'll see what the truth is soon enough." The second officer glanced at her, his expression uneasy. "Shouldn't we run the plates or check her background?" But Mulligan waved him off, his voice low and threatening. "She'll get her call when I say so. Right now, she's staying quiet." Monica bit her lip, holding back the surge of anger. She knew this wasn't the time to push him further, but the fact that he was so quick to dismiss her, so unwilling to verify her identity, felt like a slap in the face. As the officer led her back to the cruiser, she cast one last look at her vehicle, her jaw tight, as she felt a renewed sense of determination rise within her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The police station was dimly lit and uninviting, its beige walls marked with years of scuffs and stains that no amount of cleaning seemed able to erase. The smell of stale coffee and disinfectant lingered in the air, mingling with the faint hum of a ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead. Monica sat in a cold, hard metal chair in a small holding area, her wrists red and sore from the handcuffs that had only recently been removed. This was a room she'd seen many times, walking past it on her way to meet clients, witnesses, or defendants in other cases. She'd entered it with purpose, not as someone on the other side of the law. It was strange, surreal even, to be here now, not as an attorney, but as someone under suspicion, being watched through a small window by officers who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The reality of the situation began to settle over her, like a heavy, unwelcome blanket. This was more than just a misunderstanding. The assumption of her guilt had happened so quickly, so easily. Her word, her explanations, none of it had been enough. She had been arrested not because she'd done something wrong, but because of how she looked, because of the officer's perception that she didn't belong there. The frustration boiled inside her, tempered only by a practiced restraint. She had spent her career working in this very building, fighting for others for justice. She'd spent years battling assumptions and expectations, working harder and longer than many of her colleagues just to be respected and heard. And yet, Here she was dismissed, ignored, handcuffed, and treated like a criminal without so much as a second thought. The door opened, and Officer Mulligan entered the room, his expression smug as he leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. "So, still sticking to your story?" he asked, his tone mocking. Monica's gaze was steady as she looked up at him, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her anger. "I've told you the truth from the beginning," she said evenly. "I am the state attorney, and this is my car. I am being detained without cause." Mulligan shrugged, the corners of his mouth pulling into a smirk. "You know, I've heard a lot of stories in this job, but this one's new. State attorney, huh?" He scoffed, shaking his head. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" Her jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "If you would simply run the plates, call my office, or look up my credentials, you'd see I'm telling the truth." Mulligan's smirk didn't waver. He looked at her as if she were a particularly difficult suspect, someone who needed handling. He didn't seem interested in verifying anything. He seemed interested only in asserting his authority over her, a game of power that he was determined to win. "Nice try," he said, dismissing her words with a wave of his hand. "But criminals lie all the time. You think you're special?" Monica felt a spark of indignation ignite in her chest. She was done playing along, done watching him twist her words and ignore the facts. "I think you're making a serious mistake, Officer Mulligan. This isn't going to end the way you think." He chuckled, the sound low and condescending. "Lady, I've been doing this job for over 20 years. I know when someone's lying." Monica met his gaze, her voice calm but firm. "Then maybe it's time you consider that your instincts aren't infallible." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, but he masked it quickly, glancing at the door as another officer entered. This one younger, a bit more uncertain, with a clipboard in hand. "Sir, her call." "Not yet," Mulligan interrupted sharply. "She'll get her call when I decide. Right now, she's sitting tight." The younger officer hesitated, casting a quick glance at Monica before nodding and backing out of the room. As the door clicked shut, Monica felt a swell of anger that she forced herself to swallow. She had spent years respecting the law, working within its bounds to ensure justice for others. But in this moment, the law felt more like a cage than a refuge. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, each second heavy with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. Finally, the door opened, and the younger officer returned, this time accompanied by the officer at the front desk. They guided her to a small phone booth in the corner of the station, the kind used for holding detainees before they were processed or moved. Monica gripped the receiver, the weight of it grounding her as she dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang twice before a familiar voice picked up. "Richard Lawson," came the calm, steady tone of her colleague and mentor. "Richard, it's me," Monica said, keeping her voice level despite the swirl of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm at the police station. I need your help." There was a pause, a breath of silence on the other end before his tone shifted, edged with shock and anger. "Monica, what on earth happened? I've been trying to reach you." "They've detained me," she said, the words feeling strange, almost surreal. "They thought I was trying to steal my own car. I explained everything, but they didn't believe me." She could hear him exhale, a sharp, controlled sound that held the intensity of his disbelief. "Which precinct?" "Central," she replied, glancing around, half expecting Officer Mulligan to be listening in. "They refused to verify anything I told them. I need you here as soon as possible." "I'm on my way," Richard said firmly. "Don't say anything else. I'll handle it." As she placed the phone back in its cradle, Monica felt a surge of relief, the knowledge that Richard was on his way, bringing her a momentary sense of calm. Richard was a trusted ally, one of the few people who truly understood her dedication to the law and her belief in justice. He'd been by her side through some of the toughest cases, and she knew he wouldn't rest until he set things right. She returned to her seat in the holding area, the minutes dragging on as she waited. Her thoughts raced, shifting from anger to frustration and back again. The humiliation of it all weighed heavily on her. But more than that, she felt a cold resolve forming. She wasn't about to let this go, not for herself, and not for everyone who'd ever been treated with the same disregard. The sound of a door opening down the hall pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up to see Richard striding in, his expression a blend of barely contained anger and determination. He walked over to the front desk, speaking with a quiet intensity that Monica could feel even from across the room. Within minutes, Richard had secured her release from the holding area, and she joined him at the front desk, rubbing her wrists to restore feeling to them. Mulligan was nowhere to be seen, but the younger officer who had helped with the phone call was there, looking increasingly uncomfortable as Richard directed his focus on him. "Who's in charge here?" Richard demanded, his tone sharp. The officer hesitated. "Officer Mulligan, but he's—" "Then I'd suggest you get him out here," Richard interrupted, his voice laced with the kind of authority that left no room for argument. "This is a blatant violation of rights. Ms. Turner here is the state attorney, and she has been detained without due cause." The officer looked flustered, casting a quick glance toward the back offices before nodding and disappearing down the hall. Moments later, Mulligan appeared, his expression hardened, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his gaze as he took in Richard's presence. "Is there a problem?" Mulligan asked, feigning casualness, though Monica could see the shift in his demeanor. Richard stepped forward, his posture calm but assertive. "Yes, Officer Mulligan, there is. You detained the state attorney without verifying her identity, without cause, and without performing even the most basic checks. Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done?" Mulligan's smirk faltered for the briefest moment, but he quickly recovered. "I was doing my job. She had no ID, couldn't prove who she was, and was acting suspiciously." Richard's eyes narrowed, his voice low and controlled. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to make snap judgments based on assumptions. A simple check of the vehicle's registration would have shown you everything you needed to know." Mulligan crossed his arms, though his stance was less confident now. "Look, I followed protocol. We see a lot of people who claim to be someone they're not." Richard took a step closer, his tone cold. "And your failure to verify her identity was a gross negligence of your duty. We will be filing a formal complaint, and if you're smart, you'll consider the implications of what you've done here today." Mulligan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching slightly, but he didn't argue further. With a final glare, he turned and walked away, leaving Monica and Richard standing at the front desk. Richard placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" Monica managed a nod, though the weight of the experience still hung heavily over her. "I'm fine," she said quietly, but the resolve in her voice was unmistakable. "But this isn't over. They didn't just dismiss me. They dismissed everything I stand for. This was about more than one mistake." Richard gave her a knowing nod. "Then let's make sure they understand that." As they left the station, Monica felt a quiet but fierce determination settle within her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up to a system that had treated her and so many others with unwarranted suspicion and bias. And she knew, with unwavering certainty, that she would do whatever it took to make things right. It was late in the evening when Monica sat in her apartment, a cup of cooling tea cradled in her hands. The city lights cast a soft glow through the windows, illuminating the stack of files on her coffee table, each one filled with case notes, legal briefs, and depositions she had prepared for her role as a state attorney. Usually, those files represented her passion, her commitment to justice. But tonight, they were a painful reminder of the way she had been dismissed, the disregard for her word, her identity, and her role. Her phone rang, the familiar name flashing across the screen. It was Richard. She picked up, grateful for his voice on the other end. "Monica, how are you holding up?" His voice was warm, but there was a protective edge to it. He knew her well enough to understand the toll the incident had taken. "I'm managing," she replied, leaning back and closing her eyes. "I can't shake the thought of how easily they dismissed me. It's like nothing I said mattered. They didn't even bother to verify a single thing. Just assumed I was guilty." She heard him sigh on the other end. "I know, Monica, and that's why you shouldn't let this go. They need to be held accountable, not just for you, but for everyone who's been treated this way." Monica sat up, her grip on the phone tightening as she considered his words. Acting felt like the right thing to do, necessary even, but she couldn't ignore the weight of what that decision would entail. Filing a lawsuit against the police department wasn't something she'd ever imagined doing. After all, she worked alongside law enforcement. Her career depended on those relationships. It would be a risk, she said, a mix of conviction and doubt in her voice. But I also feel like I can't let it go. If I just walk away, it's like saying their actions are acceptable. Richard's voice softened. Then let's do it. We'll build a case, gather evidence, and bring this into the light. I'll be with you every step of the way. After a long silence, Monica nodded to herself, feeling her resolve strengthen. All right, let's move forward. I want to do this. I want them to answer for what they did. As they hung up, Monica felt a surge of purpose, a determination to see this through, not just for herself, but for the countless others who may have experienced similar treatment without a way to fight back. The next morning, Monica walked into Richard's office with a quiet determination. They sat together, reviewing paperwork, discussing the details of the complaint, and planning their approach. Richard's office was filled with law books, awards, and photos of him with colleagues at past conferences and seminars. The familiar, professional setting felt different today. It wasn't just an office. It was the starting line for a personal battle she was ready to fight. Once we file this, you know it's going to get a lot of attention, Richard said, his gaze serious. The media will likely pick it up, and it's going to spark public debate. Monica nodded, accepting the implications. I'm prepared for that. I want this to reach people. If it takes public scrutiny to make them reconsider their actions, then that's what I want. They went over the final details, Richard meticulously combing through each line of the complaint to ensure their case was airtight. The document outlined the sequence of events, Officer Mulligan's refusal to verify her identity, and the unjust treatment she endured. Monica knew that bringing her case to light would mean challenging not just one officer, but the attitudes and protocols of an entire department. As they filed the lawsuit, a wave of emotion swept over her, a mixture of anxiety, hope, and a fierce desire for justice. She had taken the first step toward demanding accountability, and there was no turning back. News of the lawsuit spread quickly. Local news stations picked up the story, airing segments that featured both supportive and critical viewpoints. Reporters discussed Monica's role as the state attorney, emphasizing her credibility and the unexpected nature of her experience with law enforcement. In her office, Monica watched one of these segments with a quiet focus, her attention drawn to the range of opinions. On the screen, community members shared their thoughts, some expressing support, others showing skepticism. A young woman interviewed outside a local coffee shop shook her head. It's about time someone stood up against profiling. If they can treat the state attorney this way, imagine what it's like for the rest of us. But another man, dressed in a business suit, offered a different view. I don't see what the big deal is. Officers have a tough job, and sometimes mistakes happen. Maybe she's making this a bigger issue than it needs to be. The skepticism didn't surprise her, but it stung nonetheless. Monica knew that for some, her fight would seem exaggerated. But for others, it represented hope, the possibility that someone with power was willing to challenge the system that had overlooked so many. Later that day, as Monica walked through the halls of the Justice Center, she noticed people giving her brief nods, a silent show of support. Others, however, seemed to avoid eye contact, their expressions tense. She knew the lawsuit would change the way some people saw her. But she hadn't filed it to gain approval. She'd filed it to demand change. That afternoon, as Monica returned to her office, her assistant, Sarah, knocked gently on the door before entering. "Miss Turner, there's someone here who wants to speak with you. She says she's with a local community group," Sarah said, her voice cautious. Curious, Monica nodded. "Send her in." A few moments later, a woman entered. She was in her early 40s, with short, curly hair and a determined expression. She introduced herself as Lena Rodriguez, a representative of a local civil rights organization that had been following the news of Monica's case closely. "Ms. Turner, I want to thank you for taking this stand," Lena began, her voice filled with conviction. "Your case has given hope to a lot of people who've felt voiceless for far too long. We want to support you however we can." Monica felt a swell of gratitude, her apprehensions softening slightly. "Thank you, Lena. That means a lot. I filed this lawsuit to seek justice, but knowing that others are standing with me. That makes all the difference." Lena nodded, a warm smile crossing her face. "There are many in our community who've experienced similar treatment but didn't have the resources or connections to fight back. Your case gives us a platform, a way to shed light on what's been happening in silence." As Lena shared stories from members of her organization, Monica listened intently, each account echoing a familiar story of frustration and fear. She realized that her case was no longer just about her. It was about every person who had been unfairly targeted, dismissed, or ignored. When Lena left, Monica felt a renewed sense of purpose. This fight wasn't just personal. It was a chance to stand up for an entire community that had endured far too much in silence. A week after the lawsuit was filed, the Brighton Police Department held a press conference. Chief Daniel Thompson, a tall, stern man known for his straightforward approach, stood before the cameras, his face composed but serious. Reporters filled the room, their notepads and microphones ready as they waited for him to address the growing public scrutiny. Monica watched the press conference from her office, her expression unreadable. She knew this was a strategic move on the department's part, a way to control the narrative before the case went to trial. "Good afternoon," Chief Thompson began, his voice steady. "We are aware of the lawsuit filed by Ms. Turner, and we take her allegations seriously. The Brighton Police Department is committed to upholding the highest standards of conduct, and we are conducting a thorough internal review." A reporter raised her hand. "Chief Thompson, Ms. Turner's lawsuit alleges that she was detained without cause and treated unfairly. Do you believe her case reflects a broader issue within the department?" Chief Thompson hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered his response. "We understand the concerns raised by this case, and while we believe that our officers work diligently to protect and serve, we also recognize the importance of transparency. We are reviewing our procedures to ensure they align with the needs and expectations of our community." Monica watched, feeling a mixture of frustration and skepticism. The chief's words were carefully chosen, a diplomatic attempt to acknowledge her complaint without admitting fault. It was the kind of response she had expected, but it left her feeling as though her experiences were being downplayed, cast as a mere incident rather than a symptom of a deeper issue. The press conference ended, and Monica turned off the screen, her resolve hardening. She could see their strategy: minimize, deflect, and pacify the public. But she wasn't going to let them control the narrative. She was determined to see this through, to ensure that her story, and the stories of countless others, wouldn't be silenced. In the days that followed, Monica and Richard worked tirelessly to gather evidence, comb through policies, and identify every detail that would strengthen their case. Richard called in a few favors, reaching out to legal experts, civil rights activists, and former officers who were willing to share insights on the challenges within the law enforcement system. One afternoon, as they reviewed depositions, Richard glanced up, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Monica, this case could have lasting implications for the entire city. If we succeed, it could set a precedent that forces real reform." Monica looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. "That's what I'm hoping for, Richard. It's why I'm willing to take this risk. This is about more than just one officer's actions. It's about holding the entire system accountable." They continued their work late into the night, poring over every line of policy, every detail of the events that led to her detention. With each passing day, Monica's resolve grew stronger, her frustration transforming into a fierce determination to make sure the department faced the consequences of its actions. The day the lawsuit officially went public, Monica returned to her office to find a small crowd gathered outside. Some held signs with messages of support, phrases like "Justice for Monica" and "Stand against profiling." Others stood quietly, their expressions filled with hope and solidarity. As she walked toward the building, a young man approached her, his face earnest and determined. "Miss Turner, thank you for standing up. What happened to you has happened to so many of us. You're giving us a voice." Monica felt a lump in her throat as she thanked him, moved by the sincerity in his words. It was moments like these that reminded her of why she had filed the lawsuit, why she was willing to endure the scrutiny and the backlash. But not everyone was supportive. Throughout the day, she received messages and calls questioning her motives, doubting her experience, or outright accusing her of overreacting. A few emails were harsher, their tone accusatory and dismissive. It hurt, but she pushed through, knowing that the skepticism was part of the fight. She couldn't change everyone's mind, but she could demand accountability. And as the sun set over the city that evening, she knew she was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. The days leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of preparation, media scrutiny, and quiet moments of introspection for Monica. She spent long hours with Richard in his office, carefully combing through each document, police protocol, and deposition that could strengthen their case. His office, normally a place of focused calm, was now brimming with the intensity of their upcoming legal battle. One afternoon, Richard pulled up the deposition from Officer Mulligan. His statement was filled with vague language about reasonable suspicion and following standard procedure. He and the police department's legal team were attempting to paint Monica's detention as an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than a deliberate disregard for her rights. Richard set the deposition aside, his expression darkening as he turned to Monica. "They're really trying to spin this as a routine interaction. They're claiming you were agitated, that your behavior raised legitimate questions." Monica took a deep breath, steadying herself against the frustration building inside her. "They're trying to make it seem like my reaction was a reason for detainment, as if my calm explanation somehow made me suspicious." Richard nodded, an edge of anger in his voice. "Exactly. They're framing this to make it sound like their hands were tied. It's a classic tactic. Shift the blame onto the person who was wronged." Monica clenched her jaw, but a small, determined smile crossed her face. "Then we'll make sure they don't get away with it. I didn't file this lawsuit to let them twist the truth." They continued poring over the details, Richard's focus as sharp as her own. Every document they reviewed, every piece of evidence they organized, fortified Monica's resolve. This wasn't just about her name or reputation. It was about calling out an injustice that had been ignored for far too long. As news of the case spread, Monica noticed a shift in her relationships with some colleagues and even a few friends. Some avoided eye contact when she passed in the hallway, while others offered brief words of support, quickly excusing themselves afterward. It was as if her decision to stand up had created an invisible divide between her and the people she'd once considered allies. One morning, while she was grabbing coffee in the break room, Tom Garrett, a fellow attorney she had known since law school, approached her. He was known for his level-headedness and often offered her advice, but today, his demeanor was tense. "Hey, Monica," he said, his tone careful. "I just want to talk to you about, the case." She offered a polite smile, though she could sense the hesitance in his voice. "Of course, Tom. What's on your mind?" He shifted, glancing around as if making sure they were alone. "Look, I get why you're upset. What happened wasn't right. But are you sure this is the best way to handle it? I mean, suing the police department, it's a pretty bold move." Monica took a slow breath, keeping her tone steady. "Tom, this isn't just about one incident. This is about holding the department accountable. If they can dismiss the state attorney without a second thought, what does that mean for everyone else?" Tom nodded, but his expression remained doubtful. "I understand. It's just while people are talking, some are saying that you're taking it too far. You've worked with these officers, trusted them. And now," he trailed off, his gaze conflicted. Monica's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet determination. "Tom, I filed this lawsuit because trust has to go both ways. If we let something like this slide, we're saying it's okay for officers to make assumptions based on nothing but their own biases. This fight is about justice, plain and simple." Tom gave a small, uncomfortable nod before murmuring, "I hope you're right." With that, he left, his hesitation lingering in the air like a fog. As Monica watched him go, she felt a pang of disappointment. She had hoped her colleagues would understand her stance, but she knew she couldn't let their doubts shake her. The pursuit of justice often meant facing discomfort, even from those who should have stood by her. The public attention on Monica's case grew with each passing day, and soon, national media outlets picked up the story. Headlines varied wildly, some sympathetic, others skeptical. A few praised Monica for her courage, calling her a trailblazer for justice, while others suggested that she was overstepping her bounds, portraying her as an angry public official out for revenge. One evening, a particularly controversial segment aired on a national news network. A panel of commentators discussed her lawsuit, each offering their take on the implications. Well, let's be honest, one of the commentators said, a hint of disdain in his voice. Ms. Turner is in a powerful position. She's the state attorney. Does she really expect us to believe she was treated unfairly just because she's a woman of color? Another panelist, a civil rights advocate, pushed back. That's exactly the point. She's in a position of authority, yet she was still subjected to baseless suspicion. Imagine how much worse it is for ordinary citizens who don't have her status or resources. Monica watched the segment from her living room, feeling a mixture of frustration and vindication. She knew that taking a stand would open her up to criticism, but seeing it play out on national television was a reminder of just how deep public bias ran. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lena, the community advocate she'd met earlier. "Don't let them get to you," the message read. "We're with you." Monica took a deep breath, feeling a swell of gratitude. Lena's support and the support of others like her were a reminder that this fight was bigger than herself. And that was something worth fighting for. Determined to build a strong case, Monica decided to meet with members of the community to hear their stories. Richard encouraged her to collect accounts from people who had experienced similar treatment. Their voices could serve as powerful evidence, showing that her experience wasn't isolated, but part of a larger issue. One evening, she attended a community meeting held at a local church. The room was filled with people of all ages, from teenagers to elderly residents. The sense of unity and determination was palpable. Each person gathered with a purpose, to address the injustice that had touched so many of their lives. When it was Monica's turn to speak, she stood before the crowd, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. "Thank you for coming. I want to be clear. This lawsuit isn't just about what happened to me. It's about what happens every day to people in our community. I want to hear your stories, to understand your experiences. Together, we can show that these issues are real and that change is long overdue." One by one, people came forward to share their accounts. A young man named Carlos described how he'd been pulled over 3 times in a month for what the officers called routine checks, each time feeling less like a citizen and more like a target. An elderly woman named Mrs. Bellamy recounted how her grandson had been questioned for loitering while simply waiting for her outside a grocery store. Monica listened intently, each story strengthening her resolve. The accounts varied, but the underlying theme was the same: a feeling of being overlooked, disrespected, and judged based solely on appearance. After the meeting, Carlos approached her, his face earnest. "Thank you, Ms. Turner. It's been a long time since anyone really listened to us. You're giving us a chance to be heard." Monica shook his hand, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you, Carlos. Your story matters, and I promise we'll make sure it's heard." As she left the church that night, Monica felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her case was no longer just her own. It was a collective fight, and she was determined to carry it forward with every ounce of strength she had. The next morning, as Monica arrived at the Justice Center, Sarah greeted her with a tense expression. "Ms. Turner, have you seen the statement from the police department?" Monica frowned, setting her briefcase down. "No, I haven't. What's going on?" Sarah handed her a printed copy of the statement. It was a formal response from the department's legal team, and as Monica read it, her jaw tightened. The statement claimed that Officer Mulligan had acted within his discretion and emphasized that officers had a duty to act on any suspicion. It suggested that Monica's elevated reaction and refusal to cooperate had complicated the situation. "They're trying to shift the blame onto you," Sarah said quietly, her expression sympathetic. "They're making it sound like you were the problem." Monica let out a slow breath, feeling a mixture of anger and determination rise within her. "This is exactly what I expected," she replied, setting the statement aside. "But we have the truth on our side. We're not going to let them rewrite what happened." Later that day, Monica met with Richard to discuss the department's statement. He, too, had anticipated this tactic, and they reviewed their strategy to counter the department's claims. Every word they chose, Every piece of evidence they prepared had to be precise and powerful. "They're going to try to wear you down, Monica," Richard said, his voice steady but concerned. "It's how they operate. But if anyone can handle it, it's you." She looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm not backing down. They're going to answer for this." As the court date neared, Monica found strength in the people rallying around her. Lena organized a peaceful demonstration outside the Justice Center, drawing community members who carried signs reading "Justice for All" and "End Profiling Now." News outlets covered the demonstration, broadcasting images of Brighton residents standing together, united by a shared demand for accountability. Monica watched from her office window, moved by the sight of people who had come to support her. Their presence was a reminder that her case had become a beacon for those who had felt powerless and unseen. This wasn't just her battle, it was their fight as well. Emily Tran, a local reporter, arrived for an interview with Monica, her expression respectful yet curious. "Ms. Turner, seeing this community support, how does it make you feel?" Monica paused, choosing her words carefully. "It's humbling. This case may have started with my experience, but it's become about all of us. It's about making sure that everyone, regardless of their background, is treated with the dignity they deserve." Emily nodded, scribbling notes before meeting Monica's gaze. "And do you believe this case will bring about real change?" Monica's expression was resolute. "I do. Because we're not giving up. Change isn't just a hope, it's a necessity. And if I have anything to say about it, we're going to see it through." The day of the trial had finally arrived. Monica stood outside the courthouse, taking a moment to breathe in the crisp morning air as she gathered herself. People bustled past her. Reporters called out questions, and supporters gathered nearby with quiet nods of encouragement. The tension in the air was thick, charged with anticipation and the sense that this trial was about far more than one person's experience. Richard joined her at the steps, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You ready?" She nodded, glancing toward the courthouse entrance. "I am. More than ever." As they entered the courthouse, Monica felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of nerves and determination. She'd prepared for this moment relentlessly, yet there was no ignoring the weight of what lay ahead. This trial would not only challenge the system she'd spent years supporting, but would also be an unprecedented step in her career. The courtroom filled quickly, with spectators, journalists, and members of the Brighton community eager to see the proceedings. On one side sat representatives of the police department, including Officer Mulligan and his legal team, led by Harold Graham, a well-known attorney famous for his aggressive defense tactics. He was a tall, imposing figure with a reputation for bending narratives to his advantage. Monica's gaze met his for a brief moment as they took their seats. His expression was calm, almost dismissive, as if he already knew how this trial would end. But she refused to let his confidence shake her. Today, she would stand firm, for herself and for everyone who had endured what she had. The judge, Honorable Patricia Davis, a no-nonsense woman known for her firm approach and fair judgments, called the court to order. She glanced around the room, her gaze briefly settling on Monica, as if acknowledging the significance of the case. Richard rose for the opening statement, his voice resonating through the room with a calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today to address an injustice that should never have occurred. This case is about Ms. Turner, a respected state attorney who was unjustly detained without cause. It is also about accountability and ensuring that no one, regardless of their status or appearance, is subject to unwarranted suspicion and mistreatment. We will demonstrate that Officer Mulligan's actions were not simply a mistake, but a clear failure to uphold the standards of justice and professionalism." He glanced at the jury, his expression earnest. "Ms. Turner stands before you today not just to seek justice for herself, but to highlight an issue that affects countless members of our community. We hope that this trial will lead to change, not only for her, but for everyone." When it was Graham's turn, he rose slowly, glancing briefly at Monica before addressing the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, law enforcement officers make difficult split-second decisions every day. My client, Officer Mulligan, was acting within his discretion, following his training. We are not here to condemn a person for taking precautions. We ask that you consider the challenging nature of police work and avoid casting judgment based on one isolated incident. He returned to his seat with a small, satisfied smile, as if already confident in the outcome. Monica felt a surge of frustration, but kept her face composed. Graham's statement had been carefully crafted to paint her experience as trivial, to diminish the impact of what had happened. But she knew that the truth would speak for itself, if only they could make the jury see it. The first day of witness testimonies brought forth officers and department representatives who praised Mulligan as a diligent, professional officer. They described him as cautious and committed, painting a picture of a man who was simply following the rules. When Richard cross-examined each witness, he kept his tone measured, never openly challenging their assessments, but probing their understanding of Mulligan's actions. He questioned Captain Chavez, Mulligan's direct superior. Captain Chavez, can you confirm that Brighton Police Department protocol requires officers to verify identification before making an arrest? Captain Chavez hesitated before nodding. Yes, that's standard protocol. And in this case, would it have been standard to verify Ms. Turner's identity using her vehicle's registration or running a background check? Richard asked, his voice steady. The captain shifted, looking briefly uncomfortable. Yes, that would have been the standard procedure. Thank you, Richard replied, allowing the words to hang in the air. The exchange felt like a small victory, one that chipped away at the narrative of Mulligan's actions being reasonable. Monica felt a surge of gratitude for Richard's careful strategy. Every witness, every question was bringing them closer to revealing the truth. On the second day of the trial, Monica took the stand, her heart pounding as she prepared to recount her experience in detail. The courtroom was silent as she looked out over the audience, gathering her thoughts. Richard approached her with a calm, encouraging smile. Ms. Turner, can you tell us, in your own words, what happened that day? Monica took a steadying breath before speaking. I was looking for my purse in my car. I'd parked in the Justice Center lot, and I was in a rush. That's when Officer Mulligan approached me, and, well, it became clear very quickly that he didn't believe my explanation. I told him I was the state attorney, but he dismissed it. He didn't even run my plates. He just decided I didn't belong there. Richard nodded, his tone gentle. How did that make you feel, Miss Turner? She paused, choosing her words carefully. It felt dehumanizing. I've worked my entire career to uphold the law, to bring justice to others. But in that moment, I was treated as though I didn't have a voice, as if everything I'd worked for meant nothing. Richard gave her a moment, then continued. What do you hope this case will achieve? Monica looked directly at the jury, her voice steady. I hope it will bring accountability. This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that no one else is treated like this, that our community is protected from these kinds of assumptions. When she finished, the courtroom remained silent, her words hanging in the air. She felt a sense of relief, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her voice had finally been heard. When it was Graham's turn to cross-examine, he approached her with a calm, calculated demeanor, carefully framing his questions to cast doubt on her account. Miss Turner, he began, his tone almost friendly, you mentioned that you were in a hurry. Isn't it possible that your behavior, your urgency, could have been perceived as unusual by Officer Mulligan? Monica kept her gaze steady. I understand that he may have been cautious, but I explained who I was and why I was there. I even offered to call my office to confirm it. Graham's expression remained neutral. But from his perspective, isn't it possible that you seemed agitated? That perhaps your response made him more cautious? She felt a flash of frustration, but maintained her composure. My response was not the issue, Mr. Graham. His refusal to verify my identity was. He had every opportunity to check my plates or call my office, and he didn't. Graham shifted, his expression calculating. No further questions, he said, though his tone implied he had already made his point. Monica returned to her seat, feeling both relieved and frustrated. She had held her ground, but she could see Graham's tactic, casting doubt on her demeanor, as if it justified Mulligan's actions. But she knew that truth was on her side, and she hoped the jury would see through the defense's attempts to deflect. The defense called Officer Mulligan to the stand, hoping to paint him as a conscientious officer who had been simply doing his job. Mulligan sat stiffly, his expression composed as he recounted the incident. "I saw someone going through a car in a suspicious way," he explained, glancing briefly at the jury. "When I approached her, she couldn't provide identification. Given the circumstances, I acted on protocol like I'm trained to do." Graham nodded approvingly. "At any point, did you believe you were violating Ms. Turner's rights?" Mulligan shook his head, his expression resolute. "No, sir. I was following standard procedure." Richard rose for cross-examination, his voice calm but pointed. "Officer Mulligan, you say you were following protocol. But isn't verifying identification part of that protocol?" Mulligan hesitated. "Yes, but in that situation, I made a judgment call." Richard's voice remained steady, but there was an edge to his words. "So you chose not to verify Ms. Turner's identity, despite her telling you she was the state attorney?" Mulligan shifted in his seat, his expression faltering slightly. "I acted on my training. People lie all the time." "No further questions," Richard said, letting the weight of Mulligan's admission linger in the room. On the final day of the trial, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Richard delivered a closing argument that resonated with everyone present. "This case is about accountability." Officer Mulligan chose to disregard Ms. Turner's words, her identity, and her rights, simply because he assumed she didn't belong. This wasn't a matter of caution. It was a matter of bias. "We ask that you find in favor of Ms. Turner, not just to right this wrong, but to send a message that our community values respect, equality, and justice." Graham followed, casting doubt on the necessity of the lawsuit. "This was a misunderstanding, nothing more." Officer Mulligan acted on his training. "We cannot expect officers to make perfect decisions in imperfect situations." When he finished, the room remained silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But Monica felt a sense of quiet confidence. Richard's argument had captured the essence of her fight. Now, all they could do was wait. The hours stretched on as they awaited the jury's decision. Monica sat beside Richard in the quiet courtroom, feeling the weight of every moment, every word spoken during the trial. The community members who had come to support her waited anxiously, their hope and tension mirrored in her own heart. Finally, the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict. The jurors filed in, and Judge Davis addressed them solemnly. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson rose, glancing briefly at Monica before delivering the decision. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Monica Turner." A surge of relief and gratitude flooded Monica as Richard placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of the decision sink in, feeling a profound sense of validation. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a step toward justice. As Monica stepped out of the courthouse, the crowd that had gathered outside erupted into applause and cheers. Reporters surged forward, microphones and cameras pointed in her direction, capturing every moment. Standing with her head held high, Monica felt a swell of gratitude and pride, not just for herself, but for the community that had supported her through every grueling day of the trial. Richard leaned in, his voice barely audible over the noise. "You did it, Monica. They heard you." She nodded, managing a small, heartfelt smile. "We did it, Richard. This was a win for all of us." One of the reporters managed to get close, microphone extended. "Ms. Turner, what does this verdict mean to you, and what do you hope it will mean for the future of policing in this city?" Monica took a steadying breath, choosing her words with care. "This verdict is more than just justice for what happened to me. It's a step toward a better system. I hope this will inspire the police department to look inward, to examine their procedures, and to understand the importance of treating every individual with respect." Today, our community sent a message. We won't tolerate discrimination or unwarranted suspicion. This isn't the end, but it's an important beginning. As she stepped back from the crowd, she caught sight of Lena Rodriguez in the audience, holding a sign that read "Justice for All." Lena gave her a proud nod, her expression filled with admiration. Monica returned the gesture, knowing that without allies like Lena and the community's support, this moment would never have been possible. That evening, Monica sat alone in her apartment, the soft glow of the city lights casting a warm hue through the windows. She had been surrounded by people all day, supporters, friends, colleagues. But now, in the quiet solitude of her home, she finally had a chance to process everything that had happened. The victory was real, and it felt good. But beneath the relief, there was a lingering sense of exhaustion, a heaviness that came from knowing that this one victory, as monumental as it was, would not be enough to fix the system. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Her phone buzzed with messages of congratulations and gratitude from friends, family, and members of the community. Some messages were from strangers who had watched the trial unfold and felt compelled to reach out. One message, from an old friend she hadn't heard from in years, simply read, "Thank you for fighting for all of us." Reading that message, Monica felt a surge of emotion, a mix of pride and resolve. She knew that people had been watching her closely, that her victory represented hope for those who had felt invisible or mistreated. But even as she celebrated, she knew her work was just beginning. 2 weeks after the verdict, Monica received a formal invitation from Chief Thompson to meet at the Brighton Police Department to discuss the next steps in implementing the mandated reforms. The department had been ordered to undergo an internal review, update its training protocols, and implement bias training for every officer. A small but essential step toward addressing the issues her case had brought to light. Monica arrived at the station with Richard by her side, their expressions resolute. As they entered the meeting room, they found Chief Thompson waiting, along with Captain Chavez and a handful of other high-ranking officers. Each one wore an expression that ranged from wary to introspective. Chief Thompson gestured for her to sit, his tone formal but respectful. "Ms. Turner, thank you for meeting with us. We understand that the court's ruling requires our department to make changes, and we want to discuss the specifics with you. This isn't just about checking boxes. We're committed to making real improvements." Monica gave a small nod, her expression measured. "Thank you, Chief. I appreciate your willingness to address these issues, but I'll be honest. I'm here to make sure these changes actually happen. Too often, words are offered, but real action is left behind." The chief met her gaze, a hint of humility in his eyes. "I understand, and I can assure you we're taking this seriously. We've already begun working with external consultants to design training programs focused on de-escalation, implicit bias, and community trust." Monica listened intently, her resolve unwavering. "That's a start, but I want to see the specifics. I want to know how you plan to ensure that officers understand the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of who they are or what assumptions may be made about them." Captain Chavez shifted uncomfortably, then spoke up. "Ms. Turner, I know this isn't an easy conversation. As an officer, I know the challenges we face, but I also understand that we need to address our biases. Your case has highlighted gaps that we can't ignore." Monica nodded, feeling a slight softening toward him. "Thank you, Captain Chavez. Acknowledging the problem is the first step. But this isn't just about acknowledging. It's about sustained change. This department needs to make a long-term commitment to prevent what happened to me from happening to anyone else." The chief cleared his throat, leaning forward. "We'd like to invite you to join a community oversight committee, Ms. Turner. Your insight would be invaluable, and having you involved would show the community that we're serious about these reforms." Richard glanced at Monica, his expression encouraging. She considered the offer, realizing the potential impact she could have from within. It was a chance to ensure that the department didn't just make promises, but followed through on them. After a moment, she nodded. "I'll accept, but understand that I won't hesitate to hold this department accountable. These changes need to be real, not just for me, but for everyone in this community." Chief Thompson nodded solemnly. "We understand, and we're ready to do the work." A few days after the meeting, Monica attended a community forum organized by Lena Rodriguez and other local leaders. The event was held at a local community center, and the turnout was overwhelming. Dozens of residents filled the room, eager to hear Monica speak and to share their own experiences with the police department. Monica stood at the front of the room, taking a moment to look out at the audience. Their faces were filled with a mixture of hope, curiosity, and a quiet strength that gave her a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady and heartfelt. This trial was about more than what happened to me. It was about every single person who has felt judged, dismissed, or mistreated. This community stood by me, and I will continue to stand by you. Together, we have a voice that cannot be ignored. A young man in the audience raised his hand, his expression earnest. Ms. Turner, do you think the police department will really change? Or is this just something they're saying to get the heat off? Monica gave a thoughtful nod. I believe real change is possible, but it won't happen overnight. And it won't happen without continued pressure from all of us. We have to keep them accountable, to show them that we're watching and that we won't settle for empty promises. A ripple of agreement spread through the crowd, and Monica felt a surge of solidarity. The fight for justice was far from over, but it was a fight they would face together. After the forum, Lena approached her, a look of admiration in her eyes. You're giving people hope, Monica. This is exactly what we needed. Monica smiled, feeling the weight of Lena's words. I couldn't have done this without everyone here. Change takes all of us. That night, as Monica returned home, she took a moment to reflect on how much had changed. She had begun this journey as someone wronged, someone dismissed and disrespected. But now, she stood as a voice for the people, a force for accountability and justice in her community. Her phone buzzed with a new message from Richard. Proud of you, Monica. This is just the beginning. Reading the message, Monica felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew there would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But she also knew that she had a community behind her, people who believed in the fight for equality and justice. She replied, "Thank you for standing with me every step of the way." Setting her phone down, she gazed out the window, her heart full of quiet determination. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to face it with courage and conviction. In the weeks that followed, Monica immersed herself in her role on the Community Oversight Committee, working closely with the police department to implement the reforms ordered by the court. She reviewed training programs, attended department meetings, and spoke candidly with officers about the importance of transparency and respect. One afternoon, she ran into Officer Mulligan in the hallway of the department. He looked different, humbled, quieter, as if the weight of the trial had changed something within him. "Ms. Turner," he said, his tone respectful, almost apologetic. "I just wanted to say, I understand now about what I did and why it was wrong." Monica regarded him thoughtfully, sensing the sincerity in his words. "Acknowledging it is a start, Officer Mulligan. Change is hard, but it's necessary. I hope you'll take this as an opportunity to reflect on your actions and work to make this department better." He nodded, his gaze lowered. "Thank you. I will." As she walked away, Monica felt a sense of closure, a quiet victory in knowing that even those who had wronged her could begin to see the importance of change. With each passing day, Monica saw progress. A new training session implemented, a community liaison program established, a shift in attitudes among officers who now understood the importance of respect and accountability. Slowly but surely, the Brighton Police Department was changing. One evening, she attended a town hall meeting where residents shared their experiences with the new procedures. Many expressed gratitude, while others shared their hopes for continued progress. As Monica listened, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had fought for justice, not only for herself, but for everyone who had felt silenced. And while there was still work to be done, the changes unfolding around her were a testament to the power of resilience and unity. Leaving the town hall that night, Monica felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her journey had only just begun. She would continue to fight for justice, to hold the system accountable, and to ensure that everyone, regardless of who they were, was treated with the respect they deserved. For Monica Turner, justice wasn't just a job, it was a promise. And it was a promise she intended to keep. A full year had passed since the trial, and Monica found herself reflecting on how far both she and the Brighton Police Department had come. The initial reforms had taken hold, and under the watchful eye of the Oversight Committee, progress was becoming visible. Policies had been restructured to emphasize respect, de-escalation, and accountability, and the department had implemented a new policy of open, monthly community meetings. Monica's involvement as an advisor on the Oversight Committee had evolved into something more. She had become a bridge between the community and law enforcement, listening to concerns, offering insights, and holding officers accountable when necessary. She had fought for transparency, insisting that the department keep the community informed about policy updates, training schedules, and the outcomes of misconduct complaints. The changes hadn't happened overnight, and the work wasn't easy. But as Monica looked out at the community she had fought for, she saw the beginnings of a new culture, one where people felt heard, valued, and safe. One afternoon, as Monica prepared to leave her office, her assistant, Sarah, knocked and entered with a warm smile. "Miss Turner, there's someone here to see you." "It's Chief Thompson." Monica raised her eyebrows, surprised by the unannounced visit. She hadn't expected to see Chief Thompson outside of their regular meetings at the station. "Please send him in," she said, straightening her desk as the chief entered. Chief Thompson extended his hand, his expression one of respect. "Ms. Turner, thank you for seeing me on such short notice." She gestured for him to sit, studying his face. "Of course. How can I help you, Chief?" He cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "I wanted to speak with you about an idea the department has been considering. Given your work with the Oversight Committee and the positive impact you've had, we'd like to formalize a long-term role for you as a civilian advisor to the department." Monica listened intently, intrigued. "We've seen the impact your perspective has brought, and frankly, we believe that having you on board could help us sustain the changes we've started," he continued. "I'm asking you to consider this role as a way to bring lasting reform to Brighton's policing." Monica took a moment to absorb his words, feeling a mixture of surprise and pride. She had never sought a formal role with the department, but the idea of being able to shape its future in a meaningful way was powerful. "Thank you, Chief Thompson. I'll need some time to consider it, but I'm honored by the offer," she replied, her voice steady. He nodded, his expression sincere. "We'd be fortunate to have you." As he left, Monica realized how far she had come, not just in terms of her victory, but in her ability to create real, lasting change. She sat back in her chair, contemplating the offer, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The invitation from Chief Thompson was followed by an increase in public speaking engagements, interviews, and panels, as Monica became a symbol of resilience and reform. Community members from Brighton and beyond looked to her as an example of courage in the face of systemic injustice, and her story resonated with people from all walks of life. At a community forum organized by Lena Rodriguez, Monica addressed the audience, her voice filled with conviction. "This journey has taught me the importance of collective action. One voice alone may struggle to be heard, but when we come together, we can't be ignored. Change doesn't happen in silence. It requires us to stand up, speak out, and demand better." As the crowd erupted in applause, Monica saw faces she recognized: Carlos, Mrs. Bellamy, and others whose stories she had listened to during the trial. Their presence reminded her that her fight had been about more than one case. It was about lifting up the voices of those who had been silenced. After the forum, Carlos approached her, a look of pride in his eyes. "Miss Turner, you've given us something to believe in. I hope you know that." Monica smiled, deeply moved. "Thank you, Carlos. This community is the heart of everything I do. And as long as there's work to be done, I'll be right here with you." Over the next several months, Monica worked closely with Chief Thompson and the officers who were open to change. Her focus was on transforming not only policies but also the culture within the department. She pushed for programs that encouraged officers to build relationships with the community, to see the people they served as partners rather than subjects. One day, she met with a group of young recruits who had recently completed the department's new implicit bias training. They were eager, idealistic, and open to her guidance. One recruit, Officer Emily Hayes, approached Monica after the session, her expression earnest. "Ms. Turner, I joined this department because I wanted to make a difference. The training we've gone through, your influence, it's given me hope that we can create a department that truly serves the people." Monica smiled, encouraged by Emily's words. "That's the goal, Officer Hayes. Change starts with people like you, who are willing to question, to learn, and to build trust. Never lose that commitment." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with determination. Monica felt a renewed sense of hope, knowing that the next generation of officers carried with them the values she had fought for. As Monica's role in the Oversight Committee continued, she began to see the impact of her work in ways she hadn't anticipated. Complaints of mistreatment dropped significantly, and the department's community engagement efforts were yielding positive results. People began to speak openly about their experiences with the police, knowing that there was now a structure in place to address concerns fairly and transparently. One afternoon, Monica attended a town hall meeting where residents shared their thoughts on the department's progress. Many expressed gratitude for the reforms, while others shared constructive feedback, highlighting areas for further improvement. The room was filled with a sense of unity, a shared commitment to building a safer, more inclusive community. After the meeting, Mrs. Bellamy approached Monica, her eyes warm. "You've done good work, Miss Turner. My grandson told me that he's proud of what you've accomplished. And I'm proud too." Monica felt a swell of emotion, her voice soft with gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Bellamy. This work is for all of us, for your grandson, for everyone who deserves to be treated with respect." Mrs. Bellamy patted her hand gently. "You've changed things here, Miss Turner, and I know you'll keep changing them." As the months turned into years, Monica's influence within the community and the police department continued to grow. She became a mentor to younger attorneys, guiding them not only in legal strategy, but in understanding the importance of empathy, integrity, and standing firm in the face of adversity. One of her ments, Jesse Caldwell, approached her one day after a case. "Ms. Turner, I just wanted to say thank you. Watching you take on the police department, it inspired me to become a better advocate. You've shown me what real courage looks like." Monica smiled, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. "Thank you, Jesse. Remember, being a lawyer isn't just about winning cases. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." Jesse nodded, his eyes filled with admiration. "I won't forget that." Years after the trial, Monica looked out over a city that had transformed in ways she once thought impossible. The Brighton Police Department had become a model for reform, with policies that emphasized community engagement, fairness, and transparency. The Oversight Committee continued to operate, its members ensuring that the department remained accountable to the people it served. At a ceremony celebrating the police department's progress, Chief Thompson presented Monica with a plaque that read, "In recognition of Monica Turner for her courage, her dedication, and her unwavering commitment to justice." Monica accepted the plaque, her heart filled with gratitude. As she looked out over the crowd, she saw familiar faces: Carlos, Mrs. Bellamy, Lena, and Officer Emily Hayes, each one a reminder of the journey they had shared. As she stepped down from the stage, a young girl approached her, clutching a small notebook. "Miss Turner, I want to be a lawyer someday, just like you." Monica knelt down, meeting the girl's eyes with a warm smile. "That's wonderful, and I have no doubt you'll make a difference." The girl beamed, her eyes shining with hope and determination. And in that moment, Monica knew that her fight had been worth it, not just for herself, but for every person who would continue the work she had begun. As Monica strolled through Brighton's downtown streets, familiar faces greeted her with nods of respect, waves, and smiles. She had become a local figurehead, a reminder of the community's strength, their ability to rise up together, and the power of speaking out. Brighton was different now, no longer a city where voices went unheard or dismissed. Thanks to Monica's efforts, people felt safer, more confident that their concerns mattered. The Oversight Committee had remained active, ensuring that community police relations continued to grow stronger and more transparent with each passing year. Outside a cafe, she ran into Lena Rodriguez, who was meeting with a group of young activists. They were discussing initiatives for educating residents on their rights, empowering people to be advocates for justice within their neighborhoods. Lena looked up, catching sight of Monica, and smiled. "Monica, join us?" Monica accepted the invitation, taking a seat beside Lena. She listened as the activists shared their plans to improve community police relations, ideas that range from town hall meetings to informational events at local schools. Each person spoke with conviction and passion, and Monica couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. "We've come a long way," Lena said softly, as the group continued their discussion. But we wouldn't be here without you, Monica. You gave us the courage to believe that things could change. Monica placed a hand on Lena's, her voice warm. It wasn't just me, Lena. It was everyone here, everyone who refused to stay silent. Change isn't the work of one person. It's the work of everyone willing to stand up and fight for it. The group applauded, their faces filled with admiration. In that moment, Monica saw the future, one where these young advocates would continue the work she had started, where Brighton would remain a beacon of resilience and justice. A few weeks later, Monica received an invitation to a ceremony hosted by the State Bar Association. She hadn't expected the recognition, but as she read the letter, she felt humbled and deeply honored. The association wanted to present her with an award for her contributions to legal reform and community empowerment, acknowledging the positive change she had inspired in Brighton. At the ceremony, she was surrounded by colleagues, friends, and supporters who had been with her throughout her journey. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage to a standing ovation. Richard was there, nodding proudly, along with Lena, Carlos, and even Chief Thompson. Monica approached the podium, taking a deep breath as she looked out over the crowd. "I am honored and grateful for this recognition," she began, her voice clear and steady. "But this award belongs to all of us. Every person who stood up, every person who shared their story, every person who believed that we could be better. This journey was never just about me. It was about the belief that justice belongs to everyone, that no one should be made to feel invisible or unworthy of respect." The applause that followed was overwhelming, but Monica felt calm, grounded by the knowledge that her work was far from finished. She had inspired others, but there would always be more to do, more voices to uplift, more battles to fight. As the ceremony ended, Richard approached her, his eyes shining with pride. "Congratulations, Monica. You've created something truly meaningful, and I'm honored to have been a part of it." Monica smiled, her heart full. "Thank you, Richard. I couldn't have done this without you." Years passed, and Monica continued to serve as an advocate, advisor, and mentor. She traveled to neighboring cities, sharing her experiences, helping them establish their own oversight committees, and providing guidance on community-focused reforms. Brighton had become a model for policing reform, and the lessons Monica had brought to life in her city were inspiring change in communities across the state. One day, while visiting a high school to speak to students about careers in law, she noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Emily Hayes, the young officer she had met during one of the department's training sessions years ago. Now, Emily was mentoring young students who were interested in joining law enforcement, guiding them with the same values Monica had championed. After the session, Emily approached Monica, a look of pride on her face. "Ms. Turner, I just want you to know that everything you taught us, it's making a difference. These students are excited about becoming officers who serve with integrity. They want to be part of a community, not separate from it." Monica's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you, Emily. That means more to me than you'll ever know. This is why we do the work, to inspire the next generation to believe in justice, to be voices for those who need it most." Emily smiled, nodding. "And I promise, we'll keep your legacy alive." On the 5th anniversary of the trial, Monica found herself walking through Brighton's Justice Center parking lot, the very place where her journey had begun. She stopped by the spot where she had been wrongfully detained, a place that had once held painful memories, but now served as a reminder of resilience and growth. She took a moment to reflect on all that had happened since then: the trial, the reforms, the changes within the department, and the empowerment of her community. The pain of that day had given rise to something powerful, something lasting, a legacy of courage, justice, and hope. As she stood there, a young woman approached her, a law student who had recently interned with the Oversight Committee. She was eager, idealistic, and filled with questions, just as Monica had once been. "Ms. Turner," she began, her voice a mixture of awe and admiration, "I hope to one day have even half the courage you've shown. You've changed so many lives." Monica smiled, placing a gentle hand on the student's shoulder. "Thank you. And remember, courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. The world needs people like you who are willing to fight for justice." As the student walked away, Monica felt a deep sense of peace. She had come full circle, turning a painful experience into a legacy of strength, a movement that would continue long after she was gone. Years later, Monica retired from her role on the Oversight Committee, leaving behind a community that had been transformed by her efforts. Brighton had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a place where voices mattered, and justice was within reach for everyone. In her retirement, Monica continued to write, speak, and mentor, sharing her journey and the lessons she had learned. She published a memoir, Beneath the Surface, A Journey for Justice, detailing her experience, the fight for reform, and the power of unity in the face of injustice. Her book became a testament to her legacy, a guide for those who would continue her work. As she settled into this new chapter, Monica reflected on the impact of her life's work. She had taken a stand, inspired change, and helped shape a better world for those who came after her. And though her official role had ended, her spirit and values lived on in every person she had touched, every law she had helped change, and every young mind she had inspired. In Brighton, the city she loved, Monica Turner would always be remembered as the woman who had looked injustice in the eye, refused to back down, and changed the world, one voice, one heart, and one act of courage at a time. If you found Monica's journey inspiring and believe in the power of courage and justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new stories. Join us as we continue to share powerful stories of resilience, transformation, and the impact one person can make. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more stories that inspire change.